Tonight, the Trump administration is cracking down on drug cartels at sea. A source briefed on the matter tells NBC News the U.S. is planning to deploy these 3 warships near Venezuela.
Therefore, we've doubled his reward to $50 million. Under President Trump's leadership, Maduro will not escape justice, and he will be held accountable for his despicable crimes.
President Trump has been very clear and consistent. He's prepared to use every element of American power to stop drugs from flooding into our country and to bring those responsible to justice.
The CNN report says, along with the troops, a nuclear-powered attack submarine, several destroyers, and more are also being deployed.
The clock on Nicolás Maduro's life has started ticking, and every second could be his last. The Venezuelan dictator has now joined the FBI's most wanted list of gang lords, with a staggering $50 million bounty on his head. That puts him in the same league as Escobar and bin Laden, men the U.S. hunted down at all costs. And right now, Trump is not just talking tough. He's already sent thousands of U.S. troops into the Caribbean, positioning them in waters just miles from Venezuela. You can see the massive warships cutting across the ocean, stacked with Marines and heavy equipment, ready for whatever comes next. Overhead, U.S. spy planes sweep the skies, running constant surveillance on the Venezuelan coast. And below the surface, a nuclear submarine quietly patrols, unseen, but always in striking range. This manhunt didn't start overnight. It goes back to 2020, during Trump's first term, when Maduro was first indicted for narco-terrorism. He managed to survive that, and he even outlasted the Biden years. But now, Trump is back, and the walls are closing in on him. So now, the question isn't if Maduro will fall, it's when and how. But Maduro isn't ready to go down quietly. In fact, he has already sent threats to Trump, and that's where this story takes a dangerous turn. When the United States government announced that Nicolás Maduro now carried a $50 million price tag on his head, the world took notice. Now, to put that into perspective, listen to this clip from Attorney General Pam Bondi.
This is twice the highest reward previously offered for any American fugitive in our nation's history.
By setting the reward this high, Washington placed Maduro in the same category as the most dangerous and internationally hunted figures of modern times. But the question is, why would Washington go that far? Who exactly is this Maduro guy, and what did he do to deserve such a staggering bounty? Well, according to the U.S. Department of Justice, Maduro is not just the dictator-president of Venezuela. As some of you know him, he's accused of being the mastermind of a global narco-trafficking empire. At the time of making this video, the DEA has traced tons of shipments back to networks tied to him and his inner circle. And we're not talking about a few kilos here or there. U.S. authorities have intercepted 30 tons of and nearly 7 tons were linked directly to Maduro himself. Now, to understand the gravity of that, 1 ton of on U.S. streets can generate hundreds of millions of dollars in profits. So, multiply that by 30, and you begin to see the scale of money, influence, and destruction that this network represents. But the charges didn't stop at trafficking. U.S. prosecutors say that Maduro's regime used the Venezuelan state itself as a vehicle for crime.
Maduro uses oil and drug money to finance his illegitimate government. 1 year ago, there was a presidential election, and Maduro lost by 70% of the vote. But he refused to leave office, and he used his military to steal the election.
His government allegedly transformed into what Washington calls the Cartel of Los Soles, an organized criminal network made up of military officials, ministers, and loyalists who leveraged government power to move narcotics across continents. Think about that for a second. A president, his generals, and his security forces all accused of trafficking narcotics on an industrial scale using state structures and resources. But the good thing is, most of the proceeds are now in the custody of the United States authorities.
Maduro-related assets are over $700 million in total that we have already seized. These assets include 2 multi-million-dollar jets, multiple homes, a mansion in the Dominican, multi-million-dollar homes in Florida, a horse farm valued at millions of dollars, cars, 9 vehicles, I believe, wow. Jewelry, millions of dollars in jewelry and cash.
So you understand why Washington raised the stakes so dramatically, and Attorney General Pam Bondi didn't mince words about it.
This is not a legitimate presidential regime. He is a narco-terrorist. He and his associates are flooding our country with cocaine. as a plot against America.
Now, the crazy part is, Maduro isn't working alone. He's allegedly working hand in hand with other notorious groups.
Maduro uses foreign terrorist organizations like TDA, Sinaloa, and Cartel of the Suns to bring deadly drugs and violence into our country.
These are some of the deadliest organizations on the planet, all accused of funneling narcotics into the United States. So now Trump has had enough, and he's not stopping at just doubling the bounty on Maduro's head. He's going for his head, and what he did next would force the notorious dictator into hiding. So, right after putting a record bounty on Maduro's head, Donald Trump quietly took the manhunt to a whole new level. He signed a secret directive that most people never even knew existed, and that order gave the Pentagon something it had never officially had before now: the legal authority to go after Latin American cartels the same way the US military goes after terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda or ISIS. You guys probably know that fighting narco cartels is mostly the job of the DEA or the Coast Guard, but this order moved the fight into the hands of the US military. That means Marines, warships, drones, and even nuclear submarines could now be used against cartel leaders who were labeled as narco-terrorists. And you can bet that Maduro is at the top of that list. Within days of Trump signing that order, the US military made a dramatic move. Around 4,000 Marines and sailors were deployed to the Caribbean. But it wasn't just the manpower. They sailed in with the USS Iwo Jima, a 40,000-ton amphibious assault ship that works like a floating military base. Alongside it came support ships like the USS San Antonio, destroyers armed with the Aegis combat system, P-8 Poseidon spy planes, and even a nuclear attack submarine patrolling quietly below the surface.
The CNN report says, along with the troops, a nuclear-powered attack submarine, several destroyers, and more are also being deployed.
Think about that for a second, because that's not the kind of force you use to bust a few narco boats. You guys know that Marines aren't trained for chasing smugglers. So, this is a full-blown invasion-capable task force, parked right on Venezuela's doorstep, and it's impossible for Maduro not to get the memo that the US wasn't bluffing. In fact, reports said the moment he saw the news, he went into hiding, and you can understand why, because it feels like history is about to repeat itself. You see, the United States has followed this same script many times before. In 1993, Pablo Escobar was hunted down in Colombia, with US intelligence guiding the chase. In 1989, Manuel Noriega thought he was untouchable in Panama until more than 20,000 American troops invaded and dragged him out. Years later, Osama bin Laden was tracked and killed in Pakistan. And then in 2020, Qasem Soleimani was eliminated in Iraq with a drone strike. Different countries, different names, but the method was always the same. Label the target a terrorist, close in from every angle, and apply overwhelming force until he falls. And now Maduro finds himself in that same category, accused of running a cartel linked to terrorism and treated as a hostile head of state. But there's one difference this time. Escobar didn't have China and Russia backing him. Noriega didn't have Iran on his side. Bin Laden and Soleimani didn't run a country with oil reserves as large as Venezuela's. So, that outside support may be the only reason Maduro has survived this long. But he may not survive this time, because what Trump did next shows he wants his head by all means. Trump's crackdown manhunt for Maduro didn't stop at moving ships around the Caribbean. The US has also started building a network of bases and agreements across Latin America to box Maduro in. One of the most important moves happened with Trinidad and Tobago, where Washington signed an agreement to use the island for military operations. For starters, Trinidad is only about 11 kilometers from Venezuela's coast. That's close enough for US forces to easily launch air operations inside Venezuela. In simple terms, the island has just become like a fixed US aircraft carrier pointed directly at Caracas. But the US didn't stop there. At the same time, the FBI announced it was opening a permanent base in Paraguay, right at the triple border where Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil all meet. That region has long been known as a hotspot for smuggling, cartel activity, and even suspected extremist financing. So, by putting agents there, the US isn't only tracking narco routes, it is also keeping an eye on political and military movements across South America. For Brazil, this move hit especially hard. The government in Brasilia didn't like the idea of FBI agents so close to their border, operating freely with Paraguayan approval. And this sent a quiet warning to President Lula, who had been publicly defending Maduro on the world stage. With that FBI base, plus U.S. military exercises and radar systems already in Colombia and the Caribbean, it looks like Washington has slowly surrounded Venezuela and put pressure on Brazil at the same time. Now, you have to understand that Trump's secret order doesn't only apply to Maduro's cartel of Los Soles, it also opened the door for the U.S. to target other Latin American groups if they are labeled as terrorist organizations. Now, that's where Brazil comes into the story. Intelligence reports already show that Brazil's PCC and Comando Vermelho aren't just local gangs. They are now international cartels with narco roots stretching to the US and Europe. So, if the White House decides to add them to the terrorist list, it would give Washington legal cover to launch military or intelligence operations even on Brazilian soil. So now, the attention isn't just only on Maduro, but the entire region. And what that means is that any government that protects or works with cartels could face the same pressure Venezuela is facing. With US troops surrounding his coastline, warships patrolling nearby, and a $50 million bounty on his head, Maduro had to respond. And his answer was to go on the defensive.
Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro said he would deploy 4.5 million militia members in response to the Trump administration raising the bounty on his head.
On TV, he called US threats extravagant and bizarre. But behind the scenes, reports showed a different picture. Maduro began moving in secrecy, holding government meetings in armored, signal-blocked rooms to avoid drone surveillance and hacking. His movements were cut down to the minimum, and insider information suggests that he's currently drawing up escape plans for his top officials and their families. Some even suspected that traitors inside the regime were feeding information to foreign agents. Meanwhile, the people of Venezuela were watching closely. More than 7 million had already fled the country in recent years, escaping hunger, inflation, and repression. For many, the US pressure looked like the only chance for real change. Opposition groups called it a possible path to free elections. But others feared that if fighting broke out, Venezuela could fall into civil war. Still, US pressure is building. With the bounty, the FBI base in Paraguay, the military agreement with Trinidad, and American warships parked off his coast, the noose is tighter than ever. Maduro can mobilize militias and hide in bunkers, but history shows that once Washington decides a leader is a target, it usually ends the same way. The real question now is, will Maduro end up like Escobar and Noriega, cornered and defeated? Or will foreign allies keep him afloat long enough to survive Trump's crackdown? Please feel free to share your thoughts with us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more in-depth videos like this. Meanwhile, click on any of the cards on your screen right now to watch more of our videos.